Joining us now is Michael Shoebridge, Director at Strategic Analysis Australia. Michael, thank you for joining us. What is China looking for, and should we be worried it is sending spy ships?
Well, Danica, I'm glad Pat Conroy is so relaxed. He says people collect intelligence. This is China collecting military intelligence. It's not people. It's Beijing's government sending a sophisticated electronic vacuum cleaner on a big ship to hoover up a whole lot of information about the vulnerabilities and strengths of Australian, American and other partner military systems. We should be concerned because China has been conducting a whole lot of very high-tempo military practice runs for invading Taiwan, and it wants to know vulnerabilities in the militaries that might stop it.
The Pentagon is pressing Australia to confirm what role we would play in a potential war with China over Taiwan. I've got two questions for you on this. First, what does it say about the alliance that the US is asking this question publicly? And second, is the government right to avoid giving an answer, because they sure are trying very hard to avoid a position on this?
Well, James, you're right. It's really odd to have this spill out into the public. As a really close ally with America, these discussions are normally pretty stable and well understood. So the fact they're asking the question publicly is a sign of the state of the alliance. If you can't do collective planning to deter China, you certainly aren't going to be able to successfully collectively deter China. So I absolutely understand why any Australian government will say a final decision will be made on the circumstances at the time, but we should be able to say, of course, we will engage in collective planning around a very likely scenario, a Taiwan conflict, with our American partner and our other allies.
Yeah, it's baffling that the Prime Minister couldn't even bring himself to say anything to that nature today. Now, I want to ask you about an interesting story where several sites have been singled out as possible locations that would play a critical role in a US war with China. Here in Australia, that includes the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station at North West Cape in WA, the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap in the Northern Territory, and the AUKUS Deep Space Advanced Radar capability, which is currently under construction in WA. These are just a few, Michael. But the question is, do we have the capacity to defend those facilities?
Well, Danica, this is why so many American troops, along with other partners like Japan and South Korea, are turning up in Australia with this big Talisman Saber exercise that's happening right when the Prime Minister is in China. He doesn't seem to know what the purpose of the exercise is, but it's to be able to practice having military forces operate out of Australia to protect Australia and to conduct a military campaign in the region, most likely against China, and by doing that to demonstrate China shouldn't start a war. Unfortunately, those bases you mentioned are way too vulnerable because our government is not funding capabilities like air and missile and counter-drone defence to defend them.
Michael, I want to show you a video released by the Prime Minister on social media just a couple of hours ago. Let me play it for you and then I'll ask you about it. Here it is.
I'm here in Shanghai, China, supporting Australian businesses, supporting Australian jobs and supporting our economy. We know that 1 in 4 of Australia's jobs depends upon free and fair trade, and our biggest export partner is China.
OK, so there's the Prime Minister just a couple of hours ago. I wanted to show you because you've written an article called "Making Australia the Poster Child for Economic Dependence on Beijing is a Mistake." And in that article, you write, "Our pursuit of growing trade dependence on China, because it's just about Australian jobs apparently, is making us increasingly vulnerable to Beijing and its coercion toolkit." Does the Prime Minister not realise this, or does he just think he can outsmart Xi Jinping?
Well, what a mystifying comment from the Prime Minister that we depend on free and open trade. Beijing does not engage in free and open trade. Beijing hit Australia over the head with $20 billion of coercive trade barriers that it's now removed. Meanwhile, it's hitting the rest of the world over the head around rare earth access because it's weaponised its economy. It wants countries to become more dependent on it so that it can use its economy as a weapon. And the Prime Minister is signing up to have this done to Australia. It's embarrassing, and it's a national interest error. So
just going back then to your article, then just expand to us. Is it we're becoming increasingly vulnerable to Beijing, and it's a coercion toolkit? What do you mean by that?
Well, we are growing both our exports to China and our imports from China. Other countries in the developed world, in the OECD, the 42-member grouping of democratic countries, are far less vulnerable because they don't send such a lot of their exports and take such a lot of their imports from that one place, China. So we diversified our trade a little bit to places like Japan and South Korea at the height of those $20 billion bans from China. But we've gone back to sleep, and now we're trying to grow it all back and more. In fact, the Treasurer is talking about growing our trade relationship. So's the Prime Minister, so's the Trade Minister. And Beijing has built a bunch of sanctions and other policy tools to control other countries who depend on it for trade. That's what it's doing with rare earths right now.
So, Michael, you wrote about the coercion issue, so I understand that. Australian government would be unlikely to speak out strongly against China for fear of risking all of this trade. But the other problem, of course, is if conflict breaks out, we are so reliant upon China for all of the products that we use just in daily life that potentially our entire way of life could be paralysed if conflict broke out.
Well, exactly, and that's why other developed economies have diversified their trade far more than we have. Now, obviously, iron ore and coal, China's a massive market, but the rest of the world makes things, the rest of the world eats things, the rest of the world wants our quality products. We are just being lazy and very short-sighted in doubling down on our trade dependence with China, when we know China uses its economy as a weapon. The Europeans aren't doing this, Japan's not doing this, America's certainly not doing this, but we are.
Yeah, to our own detriment as always. Michael Shoebridge, nice to catch up with you. Thanks very much for joining us on the show this evening.